Man, time flies, doesn't it? Can you believe that the previous mainline Final Fantasy game came out in 2016? That doesn't feel real to me. Was it really that long ago that I decided to start my retrospective, to chronicle each numbered entry in this long-running RPG franchise? Boy, oh boy, I am becoming a fossil. But regardless, I'm back for this special occasion, because 6 years after the fact, Square Enix has finally released the newest entry with Final Fantasy XVI. And let me just say, it is so strange to be going in without lots of baggage. No 10-year development, no shitty 1.0, the game was announced, and then it came out. What a concept! And I remember the announcement trailer like it was yesterday because boy oh boy were people excited for this one. Because it was going to be developed by the poorly titled Creative Business Unit 3. The mad lads that managed to save not only Final Fantasy XIV, but presumably the company itself. This is not just any MMO. This is one of the most highly regarded entries in the franchise. Something that went above and beyond not only with its gameplay, but also an emotional storyline featuring deep, nuanced characters. I mean, they got Tom Holland to friggin' advertise for this thing.
Hey, you don't need that sword, man. You're not the warrior of darkness.
Yes, I am. Look at my sword.
Seeing that the team behind Shadowbringers was making their own single-player entry for the new PlayStation 5, of course we were excited. And to top it off, this would be the first mainline entry to be rated M for mature. A Final Fantasy with hardcore violence, sexual content, and most important of all, bad language. An action game with the kind of gravitas that Square Enix used to be known for. You thought 15 was intense? This game features full-on summon battles that wouldn't be out of place in a Godzilla movie. A beautiful game that's incredibly well acted, something actually complete at launch. I know that's a low bar, but goddamn does that feel good to say. A lot of people bought their PlayStation 5s for this, and many consider it Game of the Year. But what about me? What did the great Clement think of Final Fantasy XVI? Did I love it? Did I hate it? Do I want Ben Starr to whisper sweet nothings into my ear? Well, obviously yes to that last point, but lucky for you, I've made a video to give my detailed thoughts, like the good old days. So as before, this video will feature heavy spoilers, although I'll try to leave the major twists for the very end. It's kinda hard to talk about certain things because the story is constantly morphing with each passing moment. Yeah, the summon monsters will battle each other, but which ones do you play as? If I reveal that, I'm potentially ruining a twist of the first 4 hours. There's an aspect of the combat that demonstrates Clive's versatility, but if I talk about it, then you'll know what he's gonna be doing throughout the game. It's kind of unavoidable. I have a lot to say, and I don't want to tiptoe over everything, so hey, I'm just warning you, this video will feature spoilers, and you should probably play the game yourself before watching. It came out months ago. You had plenty of time, Dave! But if you're still here, then welcome. It's time to talk about Final Fantasy XVI. Our story begins in the land of Valisthea, a realm home to many different factions that are all vying for territory. Between the Crystalline Dominion, the Kingdom of Waloed, the Dalmekian Republic, the Duchy of Rosaria, and the Holy Sanbrequois Empire, everybody wants a piece of the pie. And who wouldn't when the land is filled with mountain-sized Mothercrystals, giant structures that supply the world with its ether and magic. And while some people can use these rocks to water their flowers, others, known as bearers, are born with the ability themselves. These guys can draw upon the land to shoot fireballs out of their fingertips, which, as you can imagine, frightens people. And so all of the normies decided that bearers were the scum of humanity. Lower-class citizens that are either subjugated as slaves or outright killed completely. And there's only one small subsect of these individuals who get a free pass. Royalty that happen to be dominants. A dominant is someone who is born with a link to one of the Eikons, godlike beings that they channel and transform into. Bahamut, Shiva, Ramu, Odin, Titan. It's the same Final Fantasy summons you're all familiar with. But oh, are they big. Oh, can they destroy a city like it's nobody's business. Since no one wants to piss off Bahamut's dominant, who happens to be the Empire's prince, these guys are used as deterrents. Don't mess with us, or we'll mega flare your home. It's a delicate balancing act, many kingdoms arranging marriages and courtship so that their lineage will likely have a dominant child, which is exactly what happened with the Duchy of Rosaria. After the Phoenix dominant passed away, his son, Elwyn Rossfield, was courted to a woman named Annabella just to keep that power in the family. And according to the Active Time lore, yes, that's what it's called, Elwyn and Annabella are cousins.
What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
I knew this game was inspired by Game of Thrones, but I didn't think it would keep the incest. And on that unfortunate note, time to introduce the main character. Enter Clive Rossfield. He is the son to Elwyn and Annabella and is not a dominant. No, that distinction would go to the couple's second child, Joshua. Which is not to say that Clive doesn't have any magic of his own, because his brother can bestow his dominant powers onto other people. And with this strength, Clive vows to protect his little brother by acting as his shield. Instead of being a spoiled and pampered prince, he chooses to pick up the blade, spending his life training for combat. And while this is something that most people would be proud of, his mother is not one of them. Only interested in the power and status that the Phoenix provides, Annabella sees Clive as something of an embarrassment. Even despite eventually getting what she wanted, she never warmed up to him.
He was rejected, Elwyn. Our household has no place for such a failure. He is worthless, a man like any other.
Wow. Could you imagine hating your own child like that? Especially with Clive being an upstanding citizen. Not only does he actively try to help the bearers that are working in the castle, but he also deeply cares about his brother. A worse person might have been jealous of Josh's incredible power, whereas Clive actively roots for him.
The fate of Rosaria sits on the dominant shoulders.
What about you?
I was born to be your shield, however hard it gets. I'll never let you down.
Clearly, Elwyn did all the heavy lifting when it came to parenting. He didn't just teach these kids good values, he also gave them the most adorable pupper.
Quiet, Torgal. Stop it, boy. Not now.
Aw, look at the little guy! I love him! Torgal is watched after by Jill Warwick, a young ward taken in by the Rosarians after one of their conquests. She and Clive become the closest of friends. Maybe even closer than friends. But that all has to wait because Rosaria is going off to the front lines to battle with the Iron Kingdom. Elwyn even bringing his children along, but little do they know this trip is going to change everything. Because it turns out that Annabella's cruel disposition wasn't just something to roll their eyes over. She was a ticking time bomb, someone fed up with her husband's bleeding heart morality. So she commits treason, telling the Holy Sambrek Empire where the royal family is sleeping for the night so that they can surprise and kill them. And sure enough, while stopping at Phoenix Gate, it turns into a bloodbath.
Payback, I'm warning you!
Run, Joshua, run! No!
Oh my god! They chopped Elwyn's head off! Joshua is covered in his dad's blood! Naturally, such a traumatic experience leads him to freaking out and transforming into the Phoenix.
Joshua! Stop this!
Faced with uncertainty and panic over this development, Clive then finds himself suffering a major headache, seeing a hooded figure standing amongst the chaos. This person erupts, transforming into a new icon, Ifrit. And despite giving control to the player to battle Ifrit as the Phoenix, the raging beast will not go down. It manages to ground Clive's brother and just lets loose.
Stop me, Clive!
Stop it! I swore I would protect him! No!
The blast obliterates Phoenix Gate. Clive remains the sole survivor of Ifrit's destruction. For the soldiers, his father, and his brother Joshua are all dead. Eventually, more Imperials arrive to pick apart the scene, and Annabella convinces them to save Clive's life.
Wait. As my husband never tired of telling me, he is a fine soldier. I'm sure he would make an excellent addition to the Imperial front line, all in its right place.
And so, Clive is conscripted into the Imperial army. But keep in mind that because he has the powers of the Phoenix, he is to be treated like any other bearer. Which is to say that they slap a dangerous mark on his face to show everyone that he's a slave. A branded. Any privileges he had as a prince are long gone, with him spending the next 13 years as an unwilling lapdog. And so the story begins proper when Clive is sent out with other branded to assassinate the Iron Kingdom's dominant of ice. Pouncing upon them after a big skirmish, they are successful at defeating their prey. However...
No, that...
Yes, it turns out that an older Jill was the target. Seeing this lights a fire under Clive to completely disobey his orders.
You would betray the Holy Empire?
Betray? I don't recall ever pledging allegiance to your Emperor. My service may have been bought with this brand, but not my loyalty. I just fight to survive.
And so, Clive kills his former comrade. Things aren't looking too good when the pair get surrounded, but luckily for our heroes, a man with the power to wield lightning comes in to save the day. This man's name is Sid, and amazingly, he also happened to show up with a grown-up Torgal in his company. What the hell are the odds of that?
You two acquainted? Well then, you won't mind taking him off my hands. Funny. I'd always pictured you as more the chocobo type. Clive Rosfield.
Holy shit, that voice. Ralph Ineson provides the vocals for Sid, and my god, you'd think he was the living embodiment of a cigarette. But I digress. Sid is the dominant of lightning. He's also something of a humanitarian who runs a secret refuge for bearers that's attracted a motley crew. He showed up to the battlefield not to capture Jill for his own purposes, but because he genuinely wanted to help her out. Sid detests the world's unfair equality and is looking to completely change everything from the inside out. Clive, however, isn't interested in joining his cause. While he's glad that Jill will be free, only one thing has been on his mind these last 13 years: killing the dominant of fire that took Joshua's life.
One of my scouts sent word there's a group of branded fugitives north of here, in the Imperial village of Lostwing. Among them is one he believes to be a dominant of fire.
And that's all it takes for Clive's interest to be piqued. He journeys alongside Sid to track this guy down. Along the way, they cross paths with Benedicta Harmon, an old acquaintance of Sid's who happens to be the dominant of wind. She's also looking for this mysterious man and will put down anyone who gets in her way. Despite using the amazing power of her Eikon Garuda, Clive still manages to defeat her in a fight. That's when he discovers something interesting.
Now tell me where he is.
Who? What are you? She's gone. Give her back. Give her back. Give her back!
For some reason, Clive can absorb the powers of other dominants. So now he isn't just limited to the Phoenix, he can channel Garuda as well. A hot damn. Although this doesn't mean that Benedicta is tapped out, as the horrifying realization of her weakness sends her over the edge. Consumed with overwhelming anger towards the world that treated her so badly, she fully primes into her dominant form, tearing apart the forest with her wind. It's then that Clive spots the mysterious hooded figure from Phoenix Gate and follows him into one of the tornadoes. And then he's confronted by Garuda.
Monster, I will not let you stand in my way!
Yep, the big twist of the first 5 hours is that Clive is the second dominant of fire. And after a fantastic clash with Garuda, our hero struggles with the prospect. He wasn't looking for revenge at all. Clive has a fierce battle with his own subconscious to accept the truth.
I know the truth of it now. You are not afraid. I am.
This scene was amazing. Anywho, with his personal quest over and the question of his powers left unanswered, Clive and Jill decide to remain at Sid's side, and the wily humanitarian has something rather outrageous to say.
You mean to tell me that the Mothercrystals are the reason the world is dying? Are you mad?
See, in Valisthea, there's this thing called the Blight, which is an etheric plague sweeping across, draining everything in sight. The color, the life, the magic, everything in these lands are dead, and the Blight only continues to spread. Sid believes that the reason everything is withering away is because of the magical mountains that everyone is fighting over. And so, if bearers are ever to be free, if Valisthea has any chance of surviving, the crystals gotta go. It's a dangerous plan, it's ambitious as fuck, but our heroes mean to see it through to the end. That means a lot of dangerous missions going up against a lot of dangerous folks, including those other dominants who might have something to say. But with a guy like Clive, they might just have a chance after all. And that is the setup to Final Fantasy XVI. I know I glossed over a lot with this retelling, but keep in mind that I had to spoil the first 8 hours so I could put everything into context. Why Clive uses other Eikon powers, why we always control Ifrit in the summon battles. What I didn't recap are some of the softer, more character-driven moments. Like at some point, Clive and Jill go to Rosaria and end up staying with a family friend. Not only does our hero get his standard outfit going forward, but he also has an emotional scene with Jill talking about the pain and suffering they've both had to endure.
13 years, without the faintest glimmer of hope. It was only Joshua that kept me going. I swore that I would avenge his death. That I would kill his killer. But if it was me who killed Joshua and Murdoch and all the others, then why the hell am I still breathing?
Jesus, this is a great scene. The dialogue and the acting is all top-notch. I would be remiss not to credit Ben Starr for his fantastic performance as Clive. He delivers 110%, giving the character a vulnerability that allows him to express emotions clearer than any protagonist before him. When he is sad, he will blubber like a baby. When he's happy, the joy radiates off the screen.
I'll kill you! I'll fucking kill you!
It's crazy good. I mean, this is the most AAA Final Fantasy has ever been. The facial animations are impeccable. The locations you go to are so overly detailed. Walking around Rosalith Castle was great because all of the people are living their lives. You see bearers drying clothes and soldiers training and talking to each other. And no matter how detailed the locations are, it takes no time at all to go to it. We're on the PlayStation 5, baby! And that means we've got... Loading times are now a thing of the past. When you play Spider-Man 2, you can go from one part of New York to the other in a split second. And it's all because of that solid-state drive. With 15, I criticized the frequent load times because going from one part of Eos to the other was such a significant chunk of time. But in this game, if you want to warp from Lost Wing to Waloed to Dhalmekia, it all happens in the blink of an eye. Even playing the arcade mode and going to specific stages is instantaneous, and that's something I've wanted from next-gen gaming for so long. We're finally here, and I couldn't be happier. It's a beautiful game with incredible action scenes and lots of spectacle. Like Odin slashing the ocean in half kinds of spectacle. The game is littered with crazy kaiju battles and fantastic sword fights. The choreography is insane and really, the only misstep I can see is the inconsistent frame rate. Like, don't get me wrong, when you're fighting something, it's usually running a solid 60 frames in frame rate mode. It's just when you get out of it, it starts to dip to being 40 or 50 frames. The cutscenes all run at 30, so part of me wondered if it was just a stylistic choice, but hey, it did feel a bit off when I first picked up the game. Otherwise, I'd be an asshole to complain when everything looks this good. The lighting, the fabric on people's clothing, this is the kind of game that turns people into snobs. Oh, a game doesn't look like Final Fantasy XVI? They must be lazy! Presentation-wise, it's an amazing achievement. But how it looks is not important compared to how it plays. And on that aspect, Final Fantasy XVI was always going to be polarizing. I feel like we have this conversation every single time a new game comes out, but yes, Final Fantasy XVI continues the trend that has been a thing for 10 years by being an action game. It is not turn-based, just like Final Fantasy XVII won't be turn-based. Some people need to accept that the series has changed. I guess some people are still bringing this up because they thought 15 was a special case. You know, because it started out as a spin-off, and clearly the status quo would return with the next entry. No? It's funny, the Legend of Zelda fans are starting to experience that same identity crisis. Like, they waited so long for Breath of the Wild to come out, and then they waited just as long for Tears of the Kingdom. That's over a decade without the classic Zelda formula. Why can't we have a game with traditional dungeons again? I don't want it to be open world. I don't want my weapons to break. Is this all Zelda will be now? Ah! People are very resistant to change. Even as decades pass, there's always going to be that longing for a golden age that no longer exists. I won't deny that I do wish Final Fantasy was turn-based, but I've made my peace with its direction. Anyway, I think it's interesting that when you place Final Fantasy XVI into your console, you're greeted with this statement. The legacy of the crystals has shaped our history for long enough. While that is the plot of the game, it could also be taken as an allegory. An M-rated mainline entry that ditches the strategy aspect? This ain't your daddy's Final Fantasy. But anyway, in this action game, you control Clive and only Clive. While yes, you will be accompanied by Jill and Sid and Gav and many others, you have no control over anything they do. And more often than not, Clive's on his own anyway, as he single-handedly dispatches legions of enemies. Now, I'm happy to say that the gameplay is far more interesting than it was in the last entry. You're not going to be holding one button down for auto combos, you don't have an abundant supply of items to survive every fight. No, instead, this game is just straight up Devil May Cry with a Final Fantasy skin. And I don't say that as a generalization. No, for real, so many of the abilities are just straight up the same. This game lets you attack things up close and personal with Clive's sword, or you could keep your distance by shooting magic at them. Like Ebony and Ivory, you don't need to worry about ammo as the magic doesn't drain MP. This ability can also be used to keep enemies suspended in the air and can be built up with a charge shot.
Charge shot!
Utilizing the power of the icons, Clive has a wide variety of techniques at his disposal. With the power of the Phoenix, he can instantly dash over to enemies, whether on the ground or in the air, much like Dante's Trickster trait. Using the power of Titan, Clive can summon a big shield to absorb enemy attacks, as well as counter for mega damage, much like Dante's Royal Guard. When you acquire Garuda's powers, you can use her giant claws to pull enemies closer, much like Nero and his Devilbringer. And I don't think I need to point out that Clive priming is very similar to the Devil Trigger. From the air combat to the drilling people downwards and lunging forward with your sword, everything about the combat evokes Devil May Cry. And that's no surprise, as Square hired DMC5's combat director, Ryota Suzuki. But of course, it's not one-to-one the same. For example, the controls have been completely overhauled, and if you ask me, it's for the better. Now, I'm no mega expert when it comes to Devil May Cry, but the inputs are very specific. It's the kind of game where, in order to launch people, you need to hold the lock-on button, aim the control stick away from the enemy, and then hold the attack button to jump up with them when they go flying. To dodge things, you need to lock on, aim left or right, and push the jump button. It's something I've screwed up multiple times in the heat of the moment because I think it demands a bit more precision. In 16, lock-on is a toggle, and dodging enemies is a simple button press. A forgiving maneuver that lets Clive pass through lasers despite how improbable that may seem. I love fighting the giant trolls because they swing their clubs in a circle for a long time, letting me phase through each strike and slash them to shreds. This control scheme makes combat a lot more easygoing, and with the use of restorative items, the game is not brutally difficult. Which can be a positive or a negative depending on what kind of experience you want. Essentially, this is easier Devil May Cry, but with cooldown abilities. While all of the skills I mentioned earlier were core techniques that you can use as long as you want, you also get secondary abilities that can only be triggered every 30 seconds or so. Right off the bat, Clive has access to Rising Flames and Scarlet Cyclone. The first, a powerful single strike, and the second, great for crowd control. You can only equip 2 of these abilities at a time, although the Phoenix does have 4 total, giving players a chance to switch out and experiment for optimal utility. Then, after Clive battles Benedicta, he gets a new slot and Garuda's powers, which means more fun tools to play around with. And again, you can tell from the way the menu is laid out that you're going to be getting everybody's powers. Ramuh's lightning, Bahamut's lasers, Odin's Zentetsuken. By the end of the game, you'll have over 28 Eikon skills to mix and match with. And while the strategy element is fairly light, they do have different cooldown times and better staggering power. Because once again, there is a stagger system, and Garuda in particular was great for knocking enemies off balance. Hell, when you get someone halfway staggered, you can use her claws to topple them over for more stun time. A trick I didn't discover until I was about 80% through the game. Ugh. By the end, I would purposefully hold back on certain skills because I knew that when the enemy was staggered, I'd do a ridiculous amount of damage. I mean, I have to compliment the combat system because there is a lot of neat shit you can do. From homing energy balls, to counter punishers, to an AoE electricity field that damages anyone who goes near you, this game encourages experimentation. And while you do need to acquire ability points to use all of these skills, the game does let you reset those points so that you can transfer them to something else. And even then, if you want to test it out before you buy it, the game has a dedicated training room where you can spawn in any kind of enemy you want and beat them endlessly to your heart's content. Practicing combos? What is this, a fighting game? One major criticism of Final Fantasy XVI is that the open world is pretty lacking when it comes to exploration. But that being said, I would recommend tracking down the special obelisks associated with each icon. In these special trials, you have to use specific powers with a timed scoring mechanic that forces you to understand and utilize your powers better. Like at first, I had a hell of a time using Odin's Zentetsuken, but by the end of the trial, I felt like I was a goddamn samurai. I felt motivated, like I was the storm that was approaching, provoking. Born in flames, I have been blessed. My family crest is a demon of death! Thanks to these extra abilities, everyone is going to play the game their way. I'm partial to Bahamut's dodging technique, while others will prefer Shiva's. And really, that's the most interesting thing about the combat. Once players find the setup that works for them, I get the feeling they're probably going to stick with that for the rest of the game. Because when it comes to the enemies, there is no need for any actual strategy. While using the power of the Phoenix, Clive's projectiles will be fireballs. When he channels Ramuh, he shoots electricity. You'd think like the rest of the series this would produce elemental weaknesses, but no. If you encounter bomb enemies, beings made entirely of fire, you can still bring their health down, fighting fire with fire. In 15, Noctis used multiple weapons that all had different effects depending on the enemy. By comparison, Clive only fights with identical one-handed swords. Not as varied compared to Metal Gear Rising, where Raiden can use a sword and a bow staff and scissor blades, or how Dante can use nunchucks and electric guitars, or the power of Michael Jackson. No, instead, you'll have that one moveset that you'll master very quickly. The only difference between weapons is their appearance and how much extra damage it does. Something that would be worth working for if the crafting system wasn't so simple. For example, when I defeat the Liquid Flame boss, I get a whole bunch of, well, liquid flame. At that point, the blacksmith gets a new sword blueprint, which, what are the odds, uses the exact same items that the boss dropped. You should always be crafting because you'll always have the materials. Clearly another instance of the developers trying to streamline the RPG experience. Crafting is done at the Hideaway, Clive's home away from home where Sid and all of his colleagues reside. This is the hub map that you'll always return to, starting new quests, talking to your friends, looking at the hunt board, buying new items, and crafting to your heart's content. If you're not there, you're likely in one of the 4 open world maps of Valisthea, or you're in a dedicated action stage. And these levels are where the bulk of the gameplay is. You walk down a linear corridor, wiping out trash mobs, reaching mini-bosses, fighting wave after wave, until you eventually end things with the last boss. And it's as simple as it sounds. There are a few treasure chests to find, no puzzles to solve. The world has conveniently arranged itself in one simple pathway so that the player can't get lost. Not so dissimilar from how character action games usually play, but it also echoes Final Fantasy XIV, where every single map was basically this. And once you beat these stages, you can replay them whenever you want in the game's arcade mode to shoot for a high score and relive the fun all over again. And if there's anything you'll want to revisit, it's the Eikon battles. Now, the logo image of this entry is the showdown between Ifrit and the Phoenix, and rightfully so. Battling these gigantic mythological beasts is the highlight of the game and what makes this particular entry stand out. Because every now and then you're going to come face to face with another dominant, and that's when shit is on. Like I said before, you are only going to control Ifrit. It's Ifrit versus Garuda, Ifrit versus Titan, versus Bahamut, versus Odin, etc., etc. Final Fantasy just straight up turns into a kaiju monster movie to show off the power of the PlayStation 5. As an Eikon, Clive's moveset is a little more limited, but pretty darn identical. You attack with square, shoot projectiles with triangle, and can dodge with R1. But you also gain the ability to slide across the field, negate certain attacks with an explosive blast, and eventually shoot a big fuck-off laser for good measure. You feel mighty, you feel powerful, and the little in-between cutscenes only enhance the fight. Watching Garuda straight blow your arm off, only for it to completely grow back, is all kinds of awesome. My personal favorite part of the whole entire game was the fight with Titan. He's already the biggest Eikon of them all, but after squaring off with the guy, he starts eating crystals to make himself bigger. All of a sudden, this thing is a giant force of nature using land tentacles to whip you out of the sky. The sequence is so crazy, and having Ifrit run and climb up this dude was giving me major flashbacks to Capcom's Asura's Wrath. Seriously, you remember how insane that game was? That's every Eikon battle. When you fight Bahamut, you actually grow wings and follow the fucker into outer space. You battle the dragon atop the planet's atmosphere, dodging his attacks until he resorts to using the planet-destroying Zeta Flare, a move only Donald Duck could perform as a suicidal gambit. Don't ask. The Eikon battles are so exciting, they make the summon battles of Final Fantasy XV feel as incomplete as the game they came from. And a lot of that epic feel should also be attributed to the soundtrack. Like 14, this game's music was composed by Masayoshi Soken, and if his work on the MMO didn't already solidify his status as a brilliant musician, then this game certainly will. While it doesn't have the same variety, it absolutely nails the medieval fantasy element this game's going for. When you're hanging out in Cid's hideaway, it's soft guitar as if you were listening to a bard. When you're watching the epic battles between icons, there's a choir singing along to a grand orchestra. Running through the woods feels mysterious and soothing. The madness of Barnabas is conveyed perfectly, but the most important thing of all of this is that the melodies are memorable. It's not just a movie score that'll pass through your head, it's something you'll be singing along with every time it comes up. Soken just nailed it. Now, I already said that the acting and dialogue was impeccable, but you don't get that without strong writing to back it up. And for me, it's not so much the main storyline, but the character relationships that make all of this so good. It's a damn shame we only play as Clive because he has such a strong supporting cast. Gav was the best bro ever. Initially introduced as Cid's scout, this guy has a heart of gold that will not quit. He may lighten the mood with his jovial attitude, but when shit is on the line, he always gets it done. Trustworthy and efficient, he even saves both Clive and Jill's lives when they get captured. There was a moment where Odin showed up to greet our heroes, and I got so worried that Gav was going to be killed. That's when I knew that he was a great character.
You can take a day off, you know.
Says the man who spends most of his time behind enemy lines.
Only 'cause you keep sending me there.
At some point, Clive needs help and has to seek it out from a member of his family. So he goes to his eccentric Uncle Byron, and man, I love everything about their reunion. See, at first, the old man rightfully refuses to believe that one of his long-dead nephews would suddenly be back in his kitchen. But then Clive reminds him of their favorite pastimes by reciting a play.
Meadow, thou vile sorcerer, for thy crimes against church and crown, I shall have thy head.
Curse thee, infectious flax wench. Even in death, must thou plague me still?
A fantastic scene, but then we get to know Byron, and the guy's a comical blowhard socialite, a beacon of levity and joy, which is really needed in this bleak universe.
I admit this might not be the most convenient time, but my nephew's in trouble, and I may have already promised him your help. My soldiers have better things to do than die for nothing.
And you and he are of the same mind.
Everyone I talk to loves Dion. The Prince of the Holy Empire could be compared favorably to General Leo from Final Fantasy VI. He's a human character who may be on the wrong side of the conflict, but his decency still ensures that he does the right thing. This makes him clash with his father's twisted morality, as well as his new mother-in-law, Annabella.
All shall bow before their emperor.
Father, these are the words of a tyrant.
They are the words of a god.
He's a great character, but also important in more ways than one. Because Dion is also gay. He's in love with one of his male soldiers, and it's not hinted at, it's not subtext, it's text. There's no matter of debate, one of the coolest and strongest characters in the story is flying that rainbow flag. Good for them. And speaking of Annabella, jeez, what a despicable, detestable witch she turned out to be. Part of me kind of wanted her to be the main villain over Ultima because she was the catalyst for the story, and so much of what she believes in just makes the world a far worse place for it. Barnabas is insane but compelling. Kupka has a really commanding presence, and Benedicta Harmon, I wanted so much more from her. Every NPC that Clive meets along his journey has a deep, layered backstory with strong motivations, and that's why people get attached to characters like Karen, Blackthorn, Martha, Quentin, the Dane, Lubor. It is a fully realized world. One that might be a bit too dark. Okay, so I've been blowing a lot of smoke up this game's ass, and hey, it deserves it. It's on a ton of Game of the Year lists for a reason, and I had to explain how it's not mediocre or terrible when there's so much good content here. But now we're at the part of the video where I explain why I like Final Fantasy XVI, but I don't love it. And one aspect is the dark direction. This game is rated M for mature, and while games like Type 0 and Strangers of Paradise have claimed that feat first, it always felt like it was for a little too much blood or a little too much cursing.
I don't give a fuck who you are.
Oh, Jack, you wacky edgelord. Interesting that this game is supposed to take place in the universe of the original, which, even with its dozens of remakes, has always been rated E for everyone. But obviously, this didn't last as the game started getting darker, containing increasingly heavier material. From death, to suicide, to environmentalism, to bigotry, to child abuse. I mean, you name it, this series has had a lot to say about a great many things. But it was always done with a younger mindset, never going too far. With this game, however, it really feels like Square wanted to follow a trend. Because what was popular in the 2010s? Game of Thrones and The Witcher. Two fantasy universes never meant for children, where everything was gritty and real.
But rarely do such tales have happy endings.
If I had to rank each Final Fantasy world in terms of what I'd like to visit or live in, Valisthea would be at the very bottom. So first off, Valisthea has slavery. Anyone who is shown to have magical abilities is to be put in rags and worked to the bone. Or rather, worked into stone. Because it turns out that every time a bearer uses their powers, they are draining their very life force, which ends in total petrification. It's bad enough that these people have no free will, but even if they escape, they'll probably live really short lives. And dominants aren't exempt from this either. Both Sid and Jill are shown to have petrified splotches because they keep helping out our hero. And then there's the branded. Fun fact, the brand on their faces is a very potent toxin obtained from wyverns, and if you cut it the wrong way, the branded will die. Oh joy! There is this really wild segment where Clive first infiltrates Sanbreque. Because he's a branded, everybody treats him like absolute garbage.
Keep your hands to yourself. No one will buy anything that's been soured by a branded's touch.
You want something, you come back with your master. I won't sell to some stray branded.
Welcome, good... Bugger off, branded. Can't you see I'm with a customer?
The side quests here are really interesting. One guy calls out to Clive to save his child because a dangerous wolf has chased after him. But when you actually defeat the beast, the boy is disappointed.
No! You weren't supposed to kill Wolfie. You were supposed to die.
Yeah, this shitty father and son murdered multiple branded with their wolf by pretending that the child was in danger. An act of deception that was nothing but a game to them. There's this one girl who asks you to help her find her pet, except she wasn't looking for a pet. She was actually looking for her slave. One she worked into stone, slightly disappointed that she'll have to get a new plaything now. Valisthea fucking sucks. And that's another thing about this game. There are so many times where instead of Clive saving somebody, he's too late and they're already dead. I felt so bad that Clive ended up reuniting with Lady Hannah when he first returned to Rosaria, and then as soon as he accepts the truth about being Ifrit, the Empire's just attacked and murdered the whole village of Eastpool. And then later, there's another devastating scene where they kill a priest who is going out of his way to shelter bearers from the Imperials. See, at some point, Annabella creates this fucked up group of knights known as the Black Shields. She believes that the world needs to be purified, that all of these transgressions must be rectified, and so she wants all bearers everywhere to die. This leads to a moment where Clive and Jill stumble upon a group of bearers that have been tortured and lynched and hung up on poles, and holy fuck square. Around the halfway point, all of the sunny, bright locations turn into dark, depressing ones. The body count continues to rise as more dominants start going haywire. Kupka annihilates Rosaria as revenge for Benedicta's death.
Those fuckers really went to town on this place.
All this for one man? They didn't have to go so far.
Bahamut goes apeshit and nukes the entire city of Twinside. Thousands of people die. Barnabas invades the city of Canver and just kills everyone. Then, to raise an army for his uwu boyfriend Ultima, he lets the entire continent of Ash turn into magic zombies because it's the will of God or some shit. Oh, and said God then kills more people by turning a city into his final battleground. It's actually insane how high the body count is in this game. Even some of the NPCs' fates end in tragedy because Valisthea fucking sucks. I find the atmosphere significantly oppressive compared to every other Final Fantasy, even ones where the world fucking ends. And it'd be one thing if that's all it was, but then the writers start punching above their weight. We gotta talk about the Iron Kingdom and Benedicta. So when Clive went to assassinate the dominant of ice, it turned out to be Jill. And it's not because she believed in their cause, it's because she's been their slave for 13 years. After Phoenix Gate, Jill, as well as all the women and children, were abducted from Rosaria. And how did she feel upon being defeated by Clive? At last. She was relieved. She wanted to die. You get further through the game, and Jill has some rather interesting things to say about these guys.
They killed the men and captured the women. I thought they meant to have their fun with me before the end. But the end never came. My powers awoke, and everything changed.
I mean, how else are you supposed to take that?
Clive, there's something I need you to know. I saw the Patriarch do things no one should have to see. And so I swore that he would die by my hand.
Now, there's a part of me that likes to say, no topic should be off limits. A good writer can make anything meaningful, and we shouldn't be afraid to tackle subjects that make us uncomfortable. But topics like sexual assault really need to be handled with tact. This is not something you pull out for shock value to show how much darker and edgier your game is. I'd love to say that what happened with Jill is the only example, but unfortunately, there's also Benedicta. Benedicta Harmon is depicted as a villain for the majority of her screen time. She casually murders people who pose no threat. She's in bed with both Kupka and Barnabas, a woman who is cold and calculating. But it didn't always used to be this way.
I don't know who you are anymore, or what you want. I only know what you used to say. That you were tired of running. That you just wanted to be free. Free of it all. What made you think you had to sacrifice who you were to get what you wanted?
Cid and Benedicta have a past together, one where he saved her from a miserable life. It's heavily implied that she was a victim of sexual assault, among other things. It's the justification for why she hates the world so much, and why losing Garuda's power was so devastating. Because what happens almost immediately after Clive takes her magic away? She gets ambushed by slavers.
What do we have here?
Fetch a good price, I reckon.
But we'd be doing the slavers a disservice if we didn't praise her work.
Stay away!
This event causes her to flash back to when Cid saved her from a similar fate. And it's all there in the body language. She wonders, having betrayed Cid to side with Barnabas, is this what she deserves? A cruel twist of fate, bringing her back to where she started. This trauma is what spurns her transformation into Garuda, which leads to her ultimate demise. And that is a lot to unpack. It's such a grim state of affairs to have her character go out like that. What's the commentary? That hurt people? Well, sure, but why did it have to involve sexual assault? And more importantly, is Final Fantasy the right venue for these kinds of discussions? Do we need to have lynchings alongside chocobos and Moogles and Super Nintendo sprites while giant icons battle each other like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure characters? Personally, I hope this is the darkest that Final Fantasy ever gets. I know a lot of people are going to disagree. They want that grit. They want things to be hardcore and brutal. And if that's what you want, well, guess what? This is the game for you. But with Final Fantasy having such a broad appeal, from rated E games to rated T games, I just find it kind of shocking and kind of bizarre that a game comes along that just dares and chooses to be really adult, you know? And I wish adult material didn't always drive towards being cynical and nihilistic. I like when there's a little more hope. I like when there's a little more humor. I like when there's a little more fantasy and escapism in my adventure series, but you know. There are lots of issues regarding the story, regarding the slavery and the sexual abuse, and people have had issues with that. I'm not a good enough person, a good enough speaker to really comment on all of that, but you know. It's there, it's a thing, so I'm just gonna move on. While the game's subject matter is debatable, at least we can all agree that the gameplay is still fantastic. But that does bring me to the game's biggest failing, and one that I actually have a lot to say about. And that would be the pacing. Typically, character action games don't usually last longer than 6 hours or so. And that's totally fine. These kinds of games are all about their ranking systems and replayability, offering up multiple difficulties for players to test their limits. I've replayed Metal Gear Rising dozens of times. The game is just so fun to go back to. Final Fantasy XVI, however, is still wrapped in the casing of an RPG. It is a 40-hour adventure with stages that go on for quite a while. And it's not like you just go from stage to stage, so there's a lot of in-between fluff. The cutscenes in this game go on and on. There are so many NPCs to talk to, each of which get new things to say every chapter. I don't envy the programmers and writers who have to keep the world updated. The game has 4 open-world maps that you must hoof across to reach your destination, often going back and forth to talk to specific people so you can just advance. Like, after defeating Titan, the game has a big detour where Clive now finds himself helping Cid's daughter.
Still busy saving the world?
Mid. When did you get back?
Yes, her name is Mid, which is a nice callback to Final Fantasy V, where that game Cid had a grandson with the same name. Anywho, she's trying to build a special ship called the Enterprise. Hey, another familiar name. This is a mandatory quest line that takes you back to places you've already been to talk to people you've already met, just so we can build an engine for a ship that we'll never actually drive. And boy does it feel like it takes forever because of cutscenes like this.
Excess heat is dealt with by means of the thermal displacement stack, which disperses it into the surrounding air. Now, were we to rely on thermal plating alone to achieve this effect, the rate of excess heat buildup would far exceed the displacement coefficient of the plating. In other words, the reactor would overheat and eventually explode. This is where the helm comes in. It connects to the plating, you see.
Yeah, that's great. Can we just get the thing and move on already? In this quest line, you'll fight a thing for 2 minutes and then have to wait another 20 or 30 minutes just to get to the next fight. Considering that Square pivoted the franchise from turn-based combat to make things faster and more exciting, it seems a little contradictory to keep wasting players' time with busy work. I don't know why I have to tell everyone that I defeated Titan, but hey, gotta justify that price tag. It just reminds me of Super Paper Mario. That was the third game in the series that broke tradition by replacing its turn-based combat with platforming. And while it was fine to play, it was always fighting with the RPG elements, constantly stopping for long dialogue scenes, having to investigate towns and talk to NPCs. It wasn't exciting as a platformer, and it was too simple as an RPG. Combining two different kinds of games is always pushing your luck. But it's like, okay, well, if the game is going to throw all of these cutscenes in, I'm going to bump the difficulty to its highest setting so that each fight means something. Well, unfortunately, the hardcores will be disappointed. There are only two difficulties, story mode and action mode. The latter couldn't hold Devil May Cry 3's jockstrap. Not only does the dodge feature work extremely well for most attacks, but you have access to healing items during the fight. Hell, even if you don't buy any, they're still scattered throughout the stages to refill your HP every time you transition to a new area. It's pretty easy going, which is not really a problem if you just want a relaxing time. But if you're hoping for something intense, there is no Clive Must Die mode, no legendary Dark Knight mode. Until you beat the game, that is, at which point you gain access to the New Game Plus hard mode. But personally speaking, I found it pretty boring. Oh sure, enemies hit harder and had more health, but they didn't change how they operated. I was still dodging them just fine and could use healing items the stages continued to provide. I cleared much of the mode without dying, which I'm sure hardcores don't want to hear. Oh, and I learned something else while I was doing my second playthrough. The in-game boss cutscenes cannot be skipped. This is a big problem. There's this level called Drake's Spine. Right off the bat, you battle a behemoth. An iconic Final Fantasy monster. I was looking forward to taking this thing on. And then a third of the way through, it summons a meteor to destroy Clive. It's this whole thing where Clive primes out and he tries to push it back and you gotta button mash, and yeah. It lasts for 2 whole minutes. You can't skip it. And while doing the second playthrough, I thought to myself, well wait a minute, what about arcade mode? Nope. Even in the score attack quick play thing, you still have to sit for the entire 2 minutes no matter what. That's ridiculous. There are tons of cutscenes like this. In fact, all of the Eikon Fights are like this. And I'm gonna say something strange, but am I the only one who thought the Eikon battles went on a little too long? Like seriously, my favorite part of the game is battling Titan, but you still gotta go through a lot to get to this guy. First you gotta go through the mines, then his palace, then you gotta kill the Undertaker.
The streak is over!
And with cutscenes, that's about 30 minutes of your time. Then you fight Titan. The first phase, awesome. The second phase, incredible. I love that Clive grabs one of the tentacles, jumps up to the planet's atmosphere, falls all the way back down, and just spikes the asshole in the head. What a finish to a 20-minute long battle. Wow, 20 minutes? Okay, that was a bit excessive, but wait, why is the fight still going? Yeah, there's a third phase, which in my opinion is completely unnecessary. It's Clive and Kupka falling for ages despite the fact that these guys are the size of buildings, like holy shit. The stage leading up to Bahamut is over 45 minutes long, and when you fight the damn thing, it goes on for another 25. Fuck. And I know the cutscenes are gorgeous, I know how cool this all is, but after a while, you just want them to get to the point. Did the first phase of Bahamut really need to be that long? Good thing the second phase kicked ass, otherwise I wouldn't have liked this fight. Like, it takes forever to watch, but just imagine creating it. When developers make these 20-minute sequences, how could they be oblivious to how exhausting it all is? Anyway, the last thing I want to talk about are the side quests. Every now and then you'll see these green bubbles pop up on the minimap. Extra quests with their own dedicated cutscenes, materials, experience, etc. And you know, despite my bitching earlier, I still think this game is good. Combat's fun, the visuals are awesome, the acting is insane. Like, if you're at all curious about this game, then please, take my advice. Please don't do the side quests. And to be clear, I'm not talking about the notorious marks, those are fine. I'm not talking about the plus sign quests which give you upgrades. If you want to carry extra potions or gain the ability to ride a chocobo, you definitely want to do those. No, it's everything else. And it didn't initially start that way. Every single side quest in the game has a story to tell. Fully voice-acted conversations that give you insight into Valisthea's lore. The first thing you do is hand soup to bearers in the hideaway. It wasn't challenging, but I liked it because it showed you how well respected Sid actually was. Cool. Then I do the quest in Sanbreque, and holy shit, these guys are evil as hell. But man, was it fascinating. Right on. But alongside these quests, you're also doing some mundane stuff. Hey Clive, can you fetch me a piece of lumber? Sure, I can do that. Hey Clive, you want to take out the hornets that are ruining our food? Don't see why not. Hey Clive, a piece of fabric I ordered hasn't arrived yet. Could you go and find out why? I'd like to say that these quests had cool twists to them, but no, they were very, very basic. It was a gradual thing. These quests are filled with so much dialogue, and yet they never changed. Either you talked to a bunch of people and that was the quest, or you fought one group of enemies and that was the quest. And you never fought anything unique. That's what the notorious marks are for. No, it was all just regurgitating the same trash mobs you've been battling the whole entire game. Hours pass and more quests show up, and it takes forever to finish these things because they're so damn chatty. I didn't interrupt the dialogue because I knew I was going to record the game for YouTube and didn't want any stone unturned. But man, there would be hour-long sessions where I just sat in my chair watching the dialogue, and I'd only get a battle every 20 minutes or so. I couldn't believe it.
Oh, not another meeting with silly old men. They're so boring.
What finally broke me was this quest involving a merchant. He tells Clive, "Hey, I came across this amazing bottle of wine. I want to celebrate with my friends, but I can't leave my post. Could you go get them?" I've never met this guy before. I don't know his friends.
Sounds simple enough.
So you have to watch as Clive retells the situation to 3 different people, and then you watch them celebrate, and that's the quest! Nothing interesting happened!
I'm not convinced our roles in this ruse were entirely necessary.
You spend more time watching the game than you do playing it, and that actually killed my enthusiasm. I had to take a 2-week break because I just didn't have the willpower to keep doing these quests. I'm sorry this video took so long to come out, but can you blame me? What's crazy is, I usually like side quests, and I especially liked them in Final Fantasy VII Remake. What's the difference? Well, for starters, there weren't actually that many. You did 6 in Sector 7, 6 in Sector 6, 1 or 2 in the Wall Market, and then clean up just before Shinra. In total, that's like what, 20 side quests? Not a bad number, all things considered. These quests explored both Cloud's character and Midgar. You got to fight enemies that weren't in the main campaign, and doing them gave you cool rewards where everyone reacted to your upstanding generosity. It was incredible. I loved those side quests. Contrast that with Final Fantasy XVI, and the amount of side quests goes up to 75. 75 side quests! Considering that some of these quests are 10 to 20 minutes long, yeah, that's exhausting. Look, I won't deny that sometimes there are cool side quests. Sometimes the story they're telling is interesting. But my god, you have to slog through a lot of bullshit just to get to the good stuff. Please take my advice. If you want to get into Final Fantasy XVI, you should only do the main campaign. And when you finish that, then you could try doing the side quests. But I promise you, you're gonna be bored, you're not gonna like them, so you're probably better off just skipping them. So as we come to the end of the video, I just want to say that I've pretty much said everything I wanted to say. You know, I could mention that I liked the romance between Clive and Jill. Some people said that Jill was kind of a boring character because she was so similar to Clive. She was so agreeable. There was very little conflict between the two. But I think they're both united by trauma. I think they're both united by this pain and suffering. And seeing them connect and embrace how much they love each other, I thought that was like actually really beautiful. And the moment where Jill gives her power away was actually, you know, kind of tear-jerking. I loved that moment quite a bit. Whatever you can say about this game, you can't accuse it of being incomplete. You can't accuse it of being half-assed, because no, this is a full, complete game that might have gone overboard on some cases. It might be too much content for what it's trying to deliver. The performances are incredible. Ben Starr does a fantastic job as Clive Rossfield, and everyone else just nail it. Like, the atmosphere is perfect. Visually, it's one of the best looking games I've ever played. The combat, it's modeled after Devil May Cry, so of course it's very, very fun, even though it kind of strays from the RPG elements that Final Fantasy used to be all about. See, there is one problem about 16 that has nothing to do with the game itself. It's just that it came out after Final Fantasy VII Remake. And in my opinion, 7 Remake has the best combat system in Final Fantasy right now, because it is both pretty challenging, even on normal mode. Yeah, the first boss is actually a pain in the ass, but it's a pain in the ass because you actually have to learn about how to do elemental weaknesses and how to stagger, and you actually have to use all of the characters at your disposal, whereas in 16, you just play as Clive and occasionally tell Torgal to do things. Yeah, Torgal can, like, launch enemies and heal you. He's a good pupper. And yes, you can pet the dog. Thank God. It's like I said before, Devil May Cry is good, but when you stretch it out to 40 hours and split its gameplay apart with lots and lots of cutscenes, you're kind of diluting the product. You're kind of diluting what Devil May Cry is all about. And not being able to control Jill, not being able to control Sid, there's something missing there. There's something missing from what I usually expect of a Final Fantasy game, you know? I can't help it. I'm just hardwired. I know what the series was like. I know what it used to be. And there are things about this game that I wish were better. I wish the pacing was better. I wish there was more variety. You know, Clive doesn't go fishing, he doesn't dance, he doesn't play triple triad, there is nothing but combat and lots of cutscenes, you know? So, it's not a bad game. It's not a bad game. I've seen tons of people consider this game of the year. I've seen tons of people just weep like a baby at the ending of this game. I don't want to put you off of Final Fantasy XVI from the last back half of my video. All I was trying to illustrate was that this is not my game of the year. I did not love this game, and I don't know if I'd put this in my top 10 favorite Final Fantasies of all time, but it is a good game. It is worth checking out, and I did enjoy it more than 15, more than 13, more than 12. Still, check it out. It's a good game, and I very much look forward to playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth in a few months, because that's what I anticipate is going to be my 2024 Game of the Year. Oh, I can't wait. Hey everybody, thank you for watching the video, and thank you so much for your patience. If this is the first Final Fantasy video you've seen, you should know that I did an entire retrospective on every mainline entry, including number 14, the other game that this developer has made. I loved that game. You should check it out. It didn't get as much attention as my 15 and 7 remake video. It was good. It was fantastic. Till next time, I am the Great Clement. Toodles.